Okay, welcome to the Apex Legends tutorial series. Today we're going to make WRAITH'S portal. Let's get started. We'll make a new comp. I'll call it rings, 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second, 15 seconds long, done. We'll go up to the ellipse tool up here and create a shape layer in the same shape as the portal. I'll just go into the settings here and delete the fill. We don't want that, we just want the ring on the outside. We'll call this main ring. We'll add an effect called Turbulent Displays. If I hold Alt and click on this stopwatch here, I can set an expression for the evolution. I'll type time times 200. Now you can see it moves slowly over time. I set the amount to 20 and the size to 100, and now I'll duplicate the effect and turn the size down and the amount up. And this is how we get this real lightning, wavy sort of effect. I want it to be a little bit more noisy than this, but this is how it looks so far. I'm going to go down here and create a new solid by hitting Ctrl Y. I'm going to make it white. I'm going to call this random noise map. Now add a fractal noise. Go to the transform and turn this down to 50. And now I'm going to click on this random noise map layer, go Ctrl Shift C, move all attributes and call it random noise map. I'll go onto this main ring layer again and set an effect called a displacement map and select the random noise map. If I go here and select luminance and I crank this up, you can see it's using the luminance values of that random noise map to move pixels around. And because that random noise map is so random, it makes it really funky. I'll alt click on this stopwatch here of the evolution and I'll type time times 200 again. And now everything's moving around as time moves forward. I'll add one last turbulent displace effect just to make it a little bit more random. And now I'm going to start duplicating these rings. Now all I'm doing here is I'm changing the thickness of the ring, and then I'm going into the evolution options and changing the random seed. Doesn't really matter what you change it to, just as long as it's not the same as any of the other layers. And this is just going to make it random and different compared to the main ring. Now all I'm going to do is go through and duplicate that secondary ring so that we've got heaps of different rings doing different things at different times. And that's what we want. It's just a matter of going through all the settings and changing them a little bit, making them all unique. Nice. I'm going to create a new solid. I'm going to call this oval noise map. If I add another effect to this solid layer here, you make a new solid by pressing Ctrl Y, by the way. I'll add a fractal noise and then I'll add a twirl effect and see what happens when I turn up this twirl value. I'm going to click on the solid layer and go Ctrl Shift Y, which will bring up the solid settings, and then just make the actual solid layer bigger in size. I can then go to the scale and unlink them and just scale it up on the Y axis to make it stretched out up and down. Make it that portal shape. Just going to turn the twirl up and turn the scale down inside the fractal noise, and then I can pre-compose it again by going Ctrl Shift C. Now if I go to the displacement map on this fourth secondary ring, I can select the oval noise map instead, and as I turn this up you can see how it's influencing the pixels and moving them around. Outside of this pre-comp, the rings comp, I can add a fill effect to it to make it all the same color. Now I'm just going to mess around with some glow settings here. I usually add more than one glow effect. The first one kind of creates a hot spot, and then the glow effects afterwards have a higher radius and just add a bit of color. But glow is really hard to deal with, so we'll just do what we can. Just going to go through and adjust the settings a little bit more. It's all about just how you change them and make them unique, and it's about messing with different values just to see what you can make. Right, I'm going to add a background now, which is just some Apex Legends background I pulled off of Google. I'm going to change the mode of this rings layer to screen. Just going to go to this background layer and add a curves effect to it, just so I can bring the brightness down a little bit, like this. That way we can see the rings a bit easier. I'm going to grab this puffy smoke stock effect. Just going to drag it in. I can add a fill effect to this to make it black. I just want to double click on this ellipse layer, this ellipse tool up here, while the layer is selected. And now I can go down to the mask settings and turn the expansion down and turn the feathering up. So just make the smoke fall off nicely so it doesn't have any hard edges. And now it's a matter of just duplicating this puffy smoke layer over and over and over. Rotating them around and changing the time when they start and when they finish, just so that we can really fill in that space in between the rings. I can turn the curves effect on the background off now, because since we've got this black smoke behind the rings, we can see it a lot easier. I'm going to pre-compose all of the puffy smoke layers and call it black smoke. And now I can create another shape layer, make it a bit bigger than the portal. I'm going to get rid of the stroke here by alt-clicking on the stroke up there, and then put a fast box blur and blur this out. Basically what this is doing is it's telling the smoke layer that where there is red, let there be smoke, and where there is no red, don't let any smoke be there. So I put the matte layer above the black smoke layer, and then I set the black smoke layer to alpha matte. Just going to duplicate this once more and just make it a bit more dense. Turn the transparency down a bit. I'm going to create a new solid. I'll press make comp size. I'm going to call this Shockwave. I'm going to add a fractal noise effect to this layer. I'll set it to dynamic progressive and press invert. Now I'm going to create a rectangle mask at the top of the layer. You can now set a keyframe at the start and feather it out a little bit. I'm going to set the solid colors layer to black instead of white. I'll set an expression on the evolution, time times 150, and now it moves over time. Just going to go to the transform settings and set a keyframe for the offset turbulence. If I move forward 1 second, I can move this offset turbulence down. And then over the course of 1 second, the offset will move. I'll set keyframes for the path. And then over 1 second, the path will move down like this. Set a keyframe for the expansion and make it expand over time as well. And I'll feather it out over time. And now it moves like this. Make this offset move down more. If I select these keyframes and press F9, it'll smooth it out. Now if I have these keyframes selected and click this button here to go into the graph editor, I can right click, press edit speed graph, make sure they're selected and zoom in, and then stretching this out will actually make it stop slower than it was before and just make it seem a little bit more smooth. I'm going to turn up the contrast and turn the brightness down. Cool. Set the transfer mode to screen. I'm going to add an adjustment layer called polar and add an effect called polar coordinates. Set the type to rectipolar and turn the interpolation up to 100%. You can see it's turned that line now into a ring. I'll go into the transform settings and uncheck uniform scaling and then stretch out the width a bunch and turn up the height just a little bit. Turn up the complexity, and now this is what we want. We want to get rid of that weird line that we can see there now though. First I'm just going to keyframe the opacity. Start off at 100 and then go down to 0 and then ease them by pressing F9. Just going to adjust the path here, make it start off a bit smaller. And I'm just going to change the expansion to make it end a little bit wider as well. First I'll just create a new adjustment layer by going Ctrl-Alt-Y. I'm going to type in offset to bring up this offset effect, and if I move this over you can see this line is now in the middle. I'll create a rectangular mask over the whole thing and feather it out, and then set the mode of that mask to subtract. Now if we bring this offset adjustment layer underneath the polar coordinates layer, that line is now gone. I'll select these 3 layers here and Ctrl-Shift-C to pre-compose it, and I'll call it Shockwave 1. If I right click on this now and go time reverse layer, now the shockwave moves inwards rather than outwards. I'll also set a keyframe for the scale at the start of the layer to 100% and then the end keyframe to 0%. And then I'll ease those by pressing F9. If I go back into the graph editor while those keyframes are selected, right click and press Edit Value Graph, I can now adjust the scale so that it changes over time the way I want it to. Starting off big and then increasing in speed as it scales down. Set a keyframe here for the opacity, move to the end of the layer and then set it to 0. Now I'll ease those by pressing F9 again, and now it fades out. Now add a CC glass effect onto this shockwave. Now in the CC glass effect, I just have to make sure that the bump map is set to the same layer that it's applied to. Turn the smoothness down, the distortion down. Just adds a little bit more of a liquidy distorted effect. I'll now add a tint layer, change the white to this light blue again. And now I can go ahead and start duplicating this shockwave. I'm going to duplicate it and then go into the shockwave settings and just change the random seed again. Now if I duplicate the shockwave layer inside the comp and then I go to the project and click and drag while holding Alt one of the layers onto a different layer inside the comp, you can see it actually changes it. And I'm just going to keep on duplicating these, and then each new instance of the shockwave is just going to be 10 frames after the one before it. So that they just keep on appearing and then disappearing over and over and over again. But each of them looks different to the last one. I'll now select all of these shockwave layers and pre-compose them. I'm going to duplicate the black smoke matte and call it Shockwave Matte. And I just want to make this a little bit smaller. This matte is going to make sure that the shockwaves don't extend beyond the rings, so they're kept inside the portal. I'll set the shockwaves layer to alpha matte. And there we go. Set the shockwave layer to screen. Alright, I've got these two wisp videos here, they're just stock effects. I'll bring those both down into the Shockwave layer. If I keep two of these layers the same, and then also duplicate them and make two of these layers upside down by setting the scale to a negative value rather than positive, now color code these so that I know which ones I'm dealing with. I want to drag these layers so that they're facing away from each other, but they're both sitting in the middle of the comp, like this. If I click on each layer individually and then double click on this square up the top, it'll create a rectangle mask around the entire layer. I can now go click on each individual layer again and then extend the masks out, only sideways, not up or down. Now I can select the mask for each layer and I'll set the mask expansion for each of them to -10 pixels. Now I can set the mask feather to 10 pixels as well. Now if I bring these layers again to the middle of the comp, they kind of blend in with each other a little bit nicer. I'll solo these and you can see how they look. I'll just bring these Shockwave layers to the top. I'm going to add a new adjustment layer by Ctrl-Alt-Y, call it polar and add polar coordinates, change it to rectopolar and change it to 100%. Doing the same thing here we did with the Shockwaves. Create another adjustment layer called offset, put the offset effect on it, turn the polar coordinates layer off, drag this over so that a line appears in the middle. Put a rectangle mask over the offset layer, change it to subtract, and then feather it out a bunch. And if we turn the polar coordinates layer back on, damn, that ring, that line in the ring is now gone. Just gonna select all 4 of these and then color code them, and then duplicate 4 of them and then bring them to the top and then turn them to a different color. Now I'm gonna set markers by pressing the asterisk key on the numpad, all at the same point, and then bringing these top 4 layers so that the marker is at the end of the work area. You can change the work area by moving the playhead where you want and then pressing B for beginning or N for end. Now I can change the transparency of these top 4 layers so that it starts off invisible and then ends at 100%, and then change these bottom 4 layers so that the transparency starts at 100 and then ends at 0. And if I select all of these keyframes and press F9, you'll see that this wisp now loops. And it's pretty seamless. You can kind of tell there, but it's good enough. I'm going to add a few more adjustment layers here. This one is going to be the twirl effect, which does that. This one here is going to be the transform effect. I'll rename this opacity. Basically, we just want to affect all the layers underneath this and just make them not so intense by turning the opacity in this effect down a little bit. I'm going to add one more adjustment layer. Then you add the fill effect, just so I can change these all so that they're the same color as the portal. Rename this fill. There we go. I want to grab all of these Okay, so we've run into a problem here. Because I just kept on duplicating these shockwave layers without making sure the effects were correct. Like I mentioned before, this CC glass layer inside the surface setting needs to have the bump map set to the exact same layer that the CC glass effect is applied to. Because I just duplicated these layers, it didn't change over the way I wanted it to. And it was using a different layer to adjust the way the shockwaves looked, which is why it looked weird. Just going to select all of the wisp layers and pre-compose them. I'm going to call it wisp. And now I can move this out of the shockwave layer so that it's on its own. I can now duplicate the shockwave map and rename it to wisp matte. And then set the wisp layer to alpha matte. And now I can adjust the scale of the wisp and it won't extend beyond the boundaries of the portal. Right, I'm going to create another solid here. I'm going to make it the same light blue color as the portal. Create an oval mask and then move the layer down underneath everything else, but above the background. You can feather it out and change the transfer mode to add. And turn the opacity down. And now it's adding this nice glow underneath the portal on top of the background just to add a bit of realism. I'll make one more solid. I'll make it white. I'll add a fractal noise effect to it. And I'm going to uncheck uniform scaling and really stretch it out and turn the complexity of this layer right down. I'm going to add another effect called wave warp. Change the wave width, make it really wide. Just solo this, you can see what the effect does. Turn the wave width up more. Turn the wave height up. Now I just want to change the solid size so that we're not getting that transparent area. Now it looks like this. If I duplicate this layer, you can turn the opacity of both of them down a little bit just to add a bit more randomness. I'll create one more oval shape. Put a fast box blur on it and blur it out. Make it a bit smaller. I'm going to put an effect on both of these solids here called set matte. Now inside this set matte effect, I've got to select the shape layer at the top. I'm going to change the source to effects and masks. And I'll duplicate this set matte and put it on the other solid as well. I'll turn the shape layer off and you can see what the set matte effect does. You can turn the size of the shape layer down more. I can now pre-compose these three layers. I'm going to call this distortion map. I'm going to turn it off and bring it down to the bottom. Now if I duplicate the background layer, I can set the transparency of the one at the top to 50%. I'll delete this curves, delete that one as well. Now I'm going to put an effect on this called displacement map. I'll now select the distortion map that we just made, select luminance and now crank this up. Make it 70 for each. Just going to move this shape layer over a little bit. Not completely necessary. And you can see what it's doing now, and this distortion effect alongside of everything else, we now have this as our finished product.